Would I be willing to stand before God on the judgment day and God were to say to me, "Why didn't you believe in me?" And I would say, "Well, because I thought the universe might have popped into being uncaused out of nothing." I think God would look at me and say, "You what?" I'm just not prepared to do that sort of thing. Are you?
Why is famous Christian philosopher William Lane Craig imagining himself as an atheist at the judgment? Well, he's illustrating that you shouldn't throw away an argument for God's existence just because you're aware of an incredibly unlikely alternative. In this case, that alternative notion is that the universe might not have had a cause. Craig's statement came right after he said,
"For me, this is a very personal issue, right? This is serious business. It's not just looking for an academic refutation of a proof. We're trying to here to get at reality and figure out the nature and meaning of the world."
The point is that on the one hand, there will always be objections to arguments for God's existence that seem incredibly unlikely. Academics and interested laypersons should continue to do work on those things. But the mere possibility of some alternative to God should not distract at all from the truth that the argument seems to strongly indicate. And if hearing it from a Christian philosopher isn't enough, here's atheist philosopher Graham Oppy saying that when it comes to the possibility of an infinite regress for the universe, he doesn't buy it, but that this is a different question from what goes on in the details of the arguments.
You could also have quoted me as, in a certain sense, rejecting infinite regress as well, because there are plenty of places where I've said, if you hold my toes to the fire and you say, "What do you think is most likely?" I'm going to say it's most likely that there's no infinite regress.
And moreover, he goes on to say,
I mean, what we're going to be arguing about isn't where the truth lies, but rather about the force of the arguments that you can make for the conclusion that there isn't an infinite regress.
Now, it would be foolish to think that what Graham Oppy thinks is the truth about the matter isn't informed by his study of the arguments. But in this particular moment, as a working philosopher in a discussion with another expert, his goal wasn't so much to get to the truth about the nature of reality that he actually believes, but to get into the nitty-gritty of the arguments. So here's the takeaway. Arguments don't give us this absolute certainty, really, but they can serve as good reasons to hold certain positions. And the mere remote possibility that one of the premises or steps in an argument might be wrong serves as great motivation for philosophers to do more work. But that's a different question from whether the argument does the job of pointing you as an individual trying to figure out the truth about reality to what the truth actually seems to be. If you're a Christian, keep this in mind the next time an atheist claims to have debunked one of the classical theistic arguments. And if I were an atheist, I think I would need to do regular internal checks to make sure that I'm not holding on to something that seems incredibly implausible as a way to escape the force of arguments for God. But what about atheist arguments? That's a good question, and I promise I will address that in a future video. But for now, if you haven't checked out that interaction between William Lane Craig and atheist Scott Clifton, it may have been a discussion, but it certainly felt like
a hot debate.
As for Scott, despite what I think about his double causal principle, it was very clever, and he demonstrated an exceptional awareness of the intricacies of the argument that Dr. William Lane Craig defends. Further, he was so respectful that I found aspects of his temperament and personality that I admire and would like to see true of myself in a greater way. And of course, in my opinion, Craig certainly didn't disappoint. On that note, these two men obviously have very different intuitions about what is likely to be true. After all, arguments may or may not point to the truth, but that's a different question from whether or not one is convinced by them. Scott wasn't convinced by William Lane Craig's argument. So what should a Christian do in a normal everyday conversation in a situation like that? If you're a Christian for whom it is
serious business
to reach others for Christ, and you see that the person you're talking with understands the argument and just doesn't buy it, maybe consider moving on to a different argument. We have plenty. And lastly, though we're just talking about arguments for God here, that's the first step in arguing further to the existence of specifically the Christian God. If Christianity is true, this is definitely serious business. Don't let the mere possibility of some objection detract from the strength of the argument. You remember that clip I played at the beginning of the video where an atheist William Lane Craig was standing at the judgment? Well, whether or not this is appropriately directed toward what Dr. Craig's opponent Scott was saying, he gives us an incredibly helpful nutshell of the point I'm making in this video. Craig hits the nail on the head. There's a lot on the line in this discussion either way. This isn't a game, it's serious. If one thinks the mere possibility of alternatives to God is enough to throw these arguments in the trash, all I can say is,
well, I mean, you say you believe that, I guess, and that if that's what you believe, fine.